All right. After all of the work and time that I put into getting all of that Volt stuff put together recently, I figured I would try messing with something that's a little more simple and straightforward. Not packed full of bugs, where everything actually works as intended. So we're going to talk about Zephyr, and I have just one question for you. Why are you not playing Zephyr? This is probably one of the biggest sleeper warframes that we have right now. There have been a bunch of just little small changes that have been made to Zephyr over time that didn't really get any attention because it hasn't been like a big update to the warframe, just little things here and there that just kind of sneak into the patch notes that have made Zephyr just really goddamn good. Really good. It might be one of the best crowd killing warframes that we have right now. So we're going to talk two different builds that I put together on here. One that's kind of just more typical Zephyr stuff that you would expect to do with tornadoes, and one that is actually utilizing her first ability, which nobody ever wants to use, but you should. So one of the changes that was made at some point that you might have missed is that there was an additional effect added to Zephyr's passive. Of course, she has the whole low gravity thing, but you all now also get increased critical hit chance for all of your weapons while you're airborne, which is great because Zephyr is supposed to be the flyy bird warframe. So go get up in the air and be in the air. It's going to make everything better for you. You got Tailwind, which is a tap hold ability now. You can hold the ability to hover in the air for a slow energy drain per second. You can tap it to fly. If you aim down, you will dive bomb and do big damage. It's almost like three abilities in one, really, with the dive bomb, the hover, and the tailwind flying ability. Zephyr is super fast, and it's a little bit hard to control since you have to launch yourself in straight lines. But Zephyr is a really fast warframe, which I know some people like, so definitely plenty of reasons to keep Tailwind on her instead of getting rid of it. Normally, we would be using Airburst, but on this particular build, we're using Tempest Barrage. I'll explain more about that in a second. But Airburst is her ability that allows you to launch a air projectile. It's another tap hold ability. The normal tap creates a mini vortex that pulls enemies in, or you can hold the ability to launch them away from it like a big explosion. There's not really any reason to do that, though, let's be honest. You do technically get more damage per enemy hit with this ability, but honestly, the damage has never really been high enough to justify that, especially with the augment for the first ability that's way better for dealing with groups, so we'll deal with that later. Of course, Turbulence is one of the classic ones for Zephyr. Super straightforward. You just create a windshield around you that somehow magically deflects lasers because Tenno space magic. That's why. It deflects all projectiles. It just also includes lasers. So if you combine this with flying through the air with Tailwind or hovering above enemies, as long as you have Turbulence active, you are effectively unkillable. You're high enough up to avoid getting hit by melee enemies, and you're going to avoid most AoEs from Eximus enemies or explosions. So as long as you can keep Turbulence active up in the air, you're pretty much not going to ever die. And then, of course, the other classic, Tornadoes. This is yet another tap hold ability that Zephyr has, where you're able to tap to spawn 3 tornadoes on top of enemies, and they will just kind of randomly meander all over the place. And I do believe, genuinely, the DE has managed to actually perfect machine randomness, and they didn't bother telling anybody, because I never have the slightest fucking idea where these tornadoes are going to go. Ever. So I pretty much always use tornadoes in the second form, the hold form, when you cast it, because it will spawn the tornadoes around Zephyr, and they will stay stationary. So you can pick a spot where you want to pick up enemies, drop your tornadoes right there, and they will just sit there, which is so much better, because just using the random wandering tornadoes, good luck actually getting them to go anywhere near where you would want them to go. At least they don't spawn inside of walls anymore, but that's about the only good thing about it. And despite me saying all of that, we are actually focusing on tornadoes with the first build because there is a nice little feature about tornadoes that was added at one point that makes them super good. So you might already know when you use tornadoes, you can shoot at them, you'll deal damage to the tornado, and you used to be able to affect these with elemental status effects. You can still do that. You can see it's got the kind of little colors added to it. It's got corrosive damage added to it. I have corrosive on my Tonkor right now. Now, what was changed about this is that you were able to damage the tornadoes, and it would change the damage type of those. And the tornadoes, of course, have their own damage type already. They have their own individual damage that they will apply to enemies that they pick up. The change that was made is that now, when you shoot a tornado with any weapon, you damage the tornado. The damage you deal to the tornado is dealt to the enemies that are being held by the tornado. So if you think about like Kulavo's Collective Curse, where you're able to shoot one enemy and then it basically duplicates the damage to other enemies that are being affected by the ability, Zephyr's Tornado is essentially the same thing. It's an unlisted effect right now, and it's just always 100%. It shares all the damage that the tornado takes to all enemies being held by it, which is really goddamn good. If you were to do it with something like a super strong single shot weapon like the Kuva Heck and just shoot the tornado specifically, that massive single target damage that you would be doing would be applied to all the enemies being held in the tornado. Or if you do something like a Tonkor or any other weapon with a big blast radius, the explosion itself hitting the tornado will deal damage to all of the enemies inside of it. And then, of course, the actual explosion radius from the blast will also deal damage to enemies. So for non-AoE weapons, it acts as kind of like a damage increaser or a damage multiplier, so you can spread the damage out to multiple enemies at the same time. I guess damage multiplier is not the best way to think about it, but it is more of like an actual damage multiplier for explosive weapons, because it basically allows each explosion to hit twice: the explosion from the gun itself, and then the damage being dealt by the tornado. So the reason why on this particular build we're going with Tempest Barrage is because we're locking enemies in place with the tornadoes, and this, along with the viral Tempest Augment, allows for us to apply both corrosive and viral status effects to enemies, and it's the exact same thing with the Tempest Barrage as you would get from other weapons. So when you hit the tornadoes, each individual projectile hitting the tornado is going to apply its damage and status effects to all the enemies being held inside of it. So holding enemies with tornadoes and then hitting them with Tempest Barrage very rapidly adds viral and corrosive status effects to enemies. And that's also why I know probably isn't necessary at all, and you might not want to do this, but I decided to throw on 2 of my green shards on here for additional corrosive stacks so we can get 100% armor stripping using Tempest Barrage on this particular build. So a lot of the old builds that people used to use for Zephyr were just focused purely on range and duration, because you were really only utilizing turbulence and tornadoes, and you don't need power strength for those. You still don't need power strength for tornadoes. I wanted to keep an even 100% power strength on Tempest Barrage, because if you lower the power strength, you lower the status chance for the viral Tempest Augment. As it stands right now, with 100% power strength, you get 100% status chance on the projectiles. They always have 100% status chance for corrosive no matter what the power strength is. So if you didn't want to use Viral Tempest, you could always go max range, use this without the Viral Augment, and just have corrosive. But corrosive and Viral is going to get rid of armor and also make enemies more vulnerable to damage very easily. You don't have to bring a primer weapon. You can just do it all in one like this, which is really nice. I'm really focusing on using explosive weapons because that's what I find the most fun for Zephyr. It's kind of why I've spent a bunch of time with Zephyr lately, because she's really fun to do, which is why I modded for PSF. Most of the time, it doesn't matter if you're going to be hovering above enemies, but if you have a big blast radius weapon, you might be knocking yourself down sometimes. So it's not a bad idea to throw this in there if you have it. And otherwise, we're just doing as many range mods as we can without using overextended. So we got Stretch, we got Augur Reach, Cunning Drift, not in the Eximus, I know, but I wanted to have more range, just felt better. And then we got Prime Continuity and Augur Message for duration. The shield regeneration, the shield conversion from energy spent is really, it doesn't matter for this at all. You might sometimes end up utilizing your shield gate since you cannot refresh turbulence while it's active, but you're going to have plenty of time to get your shields back up while turbulence is active. So you don't need to worry about having something like Rolling Guard to fill in the gap. The shield gate will cover you, and along with using a couple of casting speed shards like I have on here, you can really make sure you're never going to have to worry about a lot of downtime on turbulence to keep you alive, which is really nice. And then Primed Flow along with Arcane Energize, not because it's really necessary, but because there's not a whole lot of things that really feel necessary for this setup. It's really nice to have lots of duration, so you can just plop your tornadoes down and to just keep them there, as well as keeping your Tempest Barrage active for a decent amount of time. The one thing you could change on here if you wanted to, since we're really focusing on being up in the air with Zephyr. Molt Efficiency is nice for more duration, but there's also Arcane Arachne giving you more damage if you want to have more damage. I don't think this is really necessary, but then again, none of it's really necessary, is it? This is already probably far more than we need. Just being able to double the damage from your explosive weapons utilizing tornadoes and grouping enemies together is already super nice, and Zephyr's really great at crowd control with tornadoes. Adding all this extra stuff on with Tempest Barrage and Arcane Arachne is just probably overkill, but who cares? Overkill's fun, that's what we're here for. I have Aerodynamic up in the Eximus slot just because this is what Zephyr is already polarized for, and the extra aim glide duration is nice for helping to keep you up in the air longer. And then we just got Streamline down here for more energy efficiency, just so that way, between all the energy things that we have, you really don't ever have to worry about energy on this build whatsoever, which just makes it super cozy to use. There really isn't a big need for a ton of optimization on this setup, just because you're pretty much focusing on using a gun to kill things. Your Tempest Barrage is going to do decent damage overall, since it's being spread out between enemies and the tornadoes, but for the most part, you're going to group enemies together, armor strip them, viral prime them, and then blow them away with some high-powered weapon that you're bringing with you. So I'll show this off once without Arcane Arachne active, and then once with it active, just so you can kind of see the difference. And it's just typical Zephyr stuff. You got Turbulence to keep yourself protected, hold your 4 to get enemies grouped together with stationary tornadoes, plop down Tempest Barrage. It is actually killing some of them, and you can see how quickly their armor was stripped from them as well, along with having max stacks of viral status. Anyway, that's left over just gets blasted away. Go away, dude. That's great and all, but say we wanted to add on some extra damage on there with Arcane Arachne, well, there you go. They weren't even armor stripped all the way yet, or primed like they were before. Still blasted them away, no problem. It's really hard to see exactly how the damage numbers work when all this is active, because there's so many numbers that come up at the same time. But like I said, when you shoot when the damage is applied to the tornado, whatever damage that takes is then applied to all the enemies inside of it, along with the blast damage from the AoE damage from your explosive weapon also hitting the enemies that are near it. So it's hard to see exactly how the numbers play out with all of them are grouped together like this, but that is what's happening there. So now that we have 0 Tempest Barrage going on and no Arcane Arachne left over, there we go. Level 205 Steel Path Grenier, one shot with a Taunt Core. Granted, you can kill a lot of really tough enemies with a maxed out Taunt Core, but usually you can't take out like the heavy gunners with one shot like that. And we do have heavy gunners in here. Oh no, we have bombards. No, we have both. Heavy gunners and bombards, very heavily armored Grenier enemies who usually don't survive. Who usually do survive. It'll show like this. Yeah. The smaller enemies get taken out no problem with a Taunt Core. And then the bigger guys usually take multiple shots, and when we have all the tornadoes together, they get blasted away no problem. Especially when all of them are grouped together like this. They are technically being held by multiple tornadoes at once, which makes it so easy to just blast them away like that. You definitely don't have to have like a maxed out Taunt Core to do this sort of thing, but anything that you can use that has good blast radius and good damage is going to be amazing for a setup like this. This is why I was saying earlier that Arcane Arachne really is not needed for this setup. I mean, we're doing this without even utilizing Tempest Barrage, which is also probably not necessary. You could just play Zephyr as base Zephyr with no extra abilities and just use, you know, lots of range, base power strength, some good duration and efficiency, and get a good weapon to use along with it. You're going to demolish absolutely everything, because being able to group enemies together like this with the way that tornadoes spread damage around, I mean, we're getting over 1 million damage with some of those shots with the viral priming and the armor stripping. So just in case you thought that tornadoes was just a grouping ability, well, it's really not. It's certainly not anymore. It's not. So this build is super fun. Obviously, it's going to be more effective against Grenier since we're kind of focusing on armor stripping, but the viral status is really nice for any enemy. It's always going to make them take more damage, and we have guaranteed viral status on Tempest Barrage, so I think I'm actually going to keep this on Molt Efficiency. I don't see the need for Arcane Arachne on that setup. Now this one, on the other hand, I also don't see the need for Arcane Arachne focusing on Tailwind, but this build gets such silly, goofy, massive numbers that I figured, why the hell not? So, Tailwind has an augment called Target Fixation. You get increased damage for your dive bomb attack per enemy hit. And this stacks, as far as I can tell, indefinitely. And I really do mean that, because I was messing around with this yesterday trying to get big, stupid, ridiculous numbers to see how far I could push it. And I was up to over 200,000% damage increase with Target Fixation. Yes, 200,000% damage increase. And keep in mind, the base damage with this setup here for the dive bomb attack is a little over 8,000. So that is just, it's completely unnecessary damage numbers, but it's really, really, really fun to get giant damage numbers like that. This is a very similar build to the other one that we had before, except we're focusing more on power strength. And that's because we replaced Tornadoes with Terrify. Yes, I did the crazy, unthinkable sin of getting rid of Tornadoes on Zephyr. If Tailwind wasn't as good as it is, and you'll see how good it is in a moment, I would never get rid of Tornadoes. But on this particular setup, this feels really, really good. Now, armor stripping really is not a necessary thing to have on here. The reason that I wanted to do this is because you can build up damage very high and indefinitely with Target Fixation, but it's really nice to be able to get to that high damage numbers that you need to kill enemies quicker. So armor stripping them allows you to do this much faster, and you can keep building up the damage over time. Or if you accidentally lose your damage increase, which you do by being on the ground for 2 seconds straight, not getting on the ground and then you lose it 2 seconds after you touch the ground, you can touch the ground, but you have to get back up in the air. So if you're on the ground for 2 seconds, your damage increase will completely reset. So being able to just either build the damage up more quickly with armor stripping, or being able to get back into the high damage that you need to kill enemies if you accidentally lose your damage increase, feels really good for this. So without using Tornadoes, we're going to use Air Burst instead on Zephyr's kit to group enemies together. This is a 15-meter radius. This is essentially being able to just throw mini vortexes all over the place, which is super useful. We don't really need to have it all over the place necessarily, because we do also have a radius of 13 meters on Dive Bomb, which feels really good. But obviously, during missions, enemies like to move around a lot. You're not always going to have them all in the same place. And especially since we're using Terrify, which is going to make enemies run away, it feels really good to have a grouping ability to get them all together so you can just blast them all at once with one good dive bomb. So once again, since Zephyr's already polarized for aerodynamic, I threw it in here. This is especially useful on this setup since we need to stay airborne all the time. More aim glide duration just makes it easier to stay up in the air. Transient Fortitude and Intensify. Getting more baseline damage on Dive Bomb is good because it's just going to make it scale up much faster with a percentage increase from Target Fixation. Unfortunately, that augment does not get additional damage increase with Power Strength, but that's more than okay, as you'll see very soon. And the air burst damage, like I was talking about before, even with lots of enemies being grouped together, the damage really isn't that impressive. So, not worried about that. Mostly, we're using Transient and Intensify to get to 100% armor reduction on Terrify without having to use Molt Augmented. If you want to, you could drop Intensify, or hell, you could even drop Transient if you wanted to get more duration, and then throw on Molt Augmented instead of Arcane Arachne to be able to get up to that 100% armor reduction on Terrify. It's not hard to get kills with this setup whatsoever, so if you want to use Molt Augmented instead, totally understandable. I would probably drop Transient since you're going to still get the same amount of power strength, basically. You're going to get 5% more, and you'll get more duration out of this setup, which is really nice. We're doing the same range setup, not using overextended because we definitely don't want to lose power strength here. So Augur Reach, Stretch, Cunning Drift, Prime Continuity to offset the duration loss from Transient slightly. We need Target Fixation for the damage. And then we've got Streamline, Prime Flow, and Arcane Energize once again for the energy economy. Is it a bit overkill? Probably, but it feels especially good on this build because, as I was saying, we need to stay up in the air as much as possible to keep our Target Fixation damage increase up as high as possible. So this just makes it super easy to keep your energy up at all times without having to worry about it. And we are kind of spam casting a decent amount here. We are using all 4 abilities on this setup. We're finding a group of enemies, hitting them with Terrify, which is 52 energy, hitting them with Air Burst for 35 energy to group them together, hitting them with another 17 energy to dive bomb the enemies, and of course activating turbulence whenever we need to for our survivability, which is another 52 energy. Using all of these abilities all the time definitely is a decent energy drain overall. So having a really comfortable, easy to maintain energy economy feels really good. Now I want to show you one thing. I'll try and show it as best I can, and that is that for some reason when enemies are being held by when enemies are actually being held by the vortex of your air burst, they don't all get hit by your dive bomb. You can see some of these guys have not taken any damage at all. It's really strange. I'm not sure exactly why it works out that way. The best thing to do is wait for that vortex effect to go away and then dive bomb, and they all get hit every single time, guaranteed. Which is nice because it gives you a little bit of time to line up your hits. You wait for them to go down, and then you dive bomb them. We haven't even used any armor stripping, and we're already getting good amounts of kills because the damage just goes up super high. We're already at 12,000% damage increase. That is a damage increase from the 8,000 damage that we started with. Yep, see, I went down too early. The vortex was still holding the enemies in place, so they didn't actually take the damage. It's kind of annoying and unfortunate, but it's not hard to work around. See, this is why the armor stripping probably isn't necessary in the long run, but again, you need to stay in the air as much as possible to keep your target fixation damage increase up. And I know that it's very easy to do that in here when we're not actually doing any mission stuff and I have the AI turned off so I can just demonstrate the damage that we're dealing. But in an actual mission, running through hallways, getting knocked down by enemies potentially, trying to actually do mission objectives, you are going to lose your damage increase at some point. So you can see it actually does stay up for a decent amount of time. Actually, that seems like it's staying up for way too long. Well, that's strange. Anyways, I'm going to reset it just so we can I can demonstrate to you why the armor stripping feels really good on this setup. So we're going to basically do the same thing, except we're going to armor strip the enemies first using Terrify. Probably need a little bit more energy first. Go up to the group, and we have really nice range on this, so we can just actually push the correct buttons. Group them all together. Wait for the vortex to go away. Look how quickly they died there. The fact that this can scale indefinitely is hilarious, and getting super high damage numbers is very funny, but it's by no means necessary. Like, just getting a couple of dive bombs to build your damage up and then utilizing armor stripping to make it easier to kill these guys is really all you need. Like, the first one doesn't do enough. We're at 2,000%, dive bomb again, and they're all dead. We only need to get up to about 6,000% damage increase on this setup in order to start doing damage in the millions with your dive bomb. Okay, so we got a couple in there before the rest of them died. It's a little bit easier to see the numbers that way. Yeah, I saw some 5 million damage numbers in there. We're only at 16,000%, and as I said, if you're able to keep this going for a long time, you are able to get up to as much as you want. The highest I was able to get to yesterday is basically just the point where I stopped, was 200,000% damage increase. And I got a lucky hit on one particular enemy that managed to get up to 224 million damage. So, safe to say, Zephyr actually seems like she has the potential to go as far as you want. As long as you're able to keep her alive, the damage scaling is basically endless, and you're always going to be able to group enemies together no matter what. So, that's really nice to have as well. So what about, since we're talking about all this ridiculous damage, what if we do some Eximus enemies? How are they going to fare against this? I'm going to armor strip them. We're not going to be able to group them together, obviously, but we'll start doing some dive bombs to get the damage built up. There we go. Armor stripped. Only needed to get up to 4,000% damage increase with target fixation, and they're all dead. I'll do it again. We'll keep the damage increase already up and ready to go. Obviously, we're still not going to be able to group them together, but we'll just do that. Dive bomb. Oh no! They're all dead. What a shame. Yeah, this, honestly, target fixation has been around for a while, and I don't know why it doesn't get used more. I really don't. I think people just don't like the way Zephyr plays with the low gravity and with having to fly around like she does. At least for me personally, I love it, and the damage that you can deal with Tailwind and target fixation is simply goofy. Like, I don't know any other way to put this. This is silly. And that's why we use the armor strip, because even though I was able to knock down their overguard with that hit, we're at 22,000% and we still aren't able to one-shot these guys. Which isn't ideal. Being able to build it up super high and build it up as high as you want is nice, but obviously, like I said, real life is a thing, and you're not always going to be able to keep your giant damage increase from target fixation up the entire time you're doing a mission. So, there you go. Zephyr is a ridiculous Warframe. Zephyr is not getting played nearly as much as she should. I think people need to start changing that. It is so much fun to group enemies together and blow them away either with an explosive weapon or with your dive bomb from Tailwind. You probably already have a Zephyr sitting in your inventory that you just haven't touched for a while. Go try her out. It's not hard to put these builds together. 2 forma for both of these builds to make all of this stuff work. Actually, probably just 1 for the first one. And again, if you just want to try messing around with tornadoes and an explosive weapon, you don't need Tempest Barrage whatsoever. This tornadoes already does all the extra damage that you need by just spreading the damage around for you. You can just use Zephyr as is if you don't have access to Tempest Barrage, if you don't want to put Tempest Barrage on there, if you just want to give her a try and see what's actually going on here, see if it's actually worth the investment. I think it is. So there you go. Go forth, blow shit up, have a blast. Thanks for watching.